Friends, I will share with you today the Bristol that I knew 60 years ago. I recently celebrated the 60th anniversary of my arrival in Bristol, which was on August the 20th, 1953. I remember the afternoon I arrived here. It was very hot. Naturally, being in mid or late August, it would have been. In fact, I had two celebrations recently, not only of my anniversary of coming to Bristol 60 years ago, but I celebrated my birthday. And I'm not as young and energetic as I was the day I arrived here 60 years ago. Hopefully, as the body grows weaker, the mind grows stronger. I'm depending on that. And I know the time's coming when about all I could do would be with the pen or with pencil or whatever. And so I'm trying to get prepared for that. But recently I've been on my radio program and also writing for the paper, though it hadn't been published yet, trying to give a picture of what Bristol was like 60 years ago. Well, there's been some changes, and there's some places that are just like they were the day I arrived here. But I would have to say, I guess, that there's been more changes than there would be those that were just exactly alike. We're meeting today in the old Woolworth building, now Uncle Sam's, well-known office, and we're right downtown. Well, if you'll pardon me for going back about close to 150 years, this wasn't downtown. The town started up near the depot, and in order to keep near the railroad, the town spread up and down the railroad tracks. Across the tracks were two streets, Washington in Bristol, Virginia, and Third in Bristol, Tennessee. It's hard to imagine now, but those were the most elite streets in Bristol in the very beginning. At that time, people wanted to build facing the railroad. It was kind of a status symbol to live where you could be seen from the railroad. Now, of course, people avoid that, but that's the way it was. Business-wise, spread up on the north side, or rather the front street, which ran along parallel with the railroad, on the Virginia side, and up 4th Street, which ran parallel with the rails on the Tennessee side. But eventually they began to move down this way. As the town grew, and it grew very fast, it is shocking how fast it grew. Starting with one house in the middle of a field in 1952, I lost 100 years, or 1852, it began to grow fast and faster and faster and faster, and continued up to the Civil War time. There's a little let up right then, but after that it grew more. So eventually they began, instead of spreading up and down the railroad, well, all the space ran out. Instead of doing that, they began to come down what was called Main Street then. At that time, Main Street was all in Tennessee. And that was because the Virginia and Tennessee Railroad wouldn't let them cross the tracks. So they had to build everything in Tennessee, but that changed later when the line was put in the middle of the street, which is a compromise line. It's not the true line at all, but it's the old compromise. To illustrate what this part of town was very early, when H.P. King began to build his big building just below here, where we are today, people told him he was too far out of town, that it wouldn't do any good. Well, he had foresight to know that the town was fast coming this way, and eventually, very soon, in fact, he was sent on both sides. They were building on both sides of it. But that's how people thought of this area in those earliest days. They said, you're way out of town, too far from the depot. Well, before I let the thought leave me, the depot is one building that's pretty much like it was when I came here. Of course, it went down the hill there for a while, but now it's been restored, and it's about, that building is just about the same as it was when I came here. Now, one of the big changes, and that's what I've been dwelling on in my paper writings, which haven't been published yet, and also in on my radio program, which I've used yet. I have already used it there. But people have asked me, what is the biggest change you've seen in Bristol in the last 60 years? Well, the first thing I thought of is that virtually all business in Bristol was downtown at the time. This area and all on both sides and on the side streets for a block or so was like one big mall. Now, there were some neighborhood grocery stores, and speaking of grocery stores, there were at least 75 in operation 60 years ago. My first home was at number 24th Street, just about a half a block off of State. And at that time, I could have easily walked to 24 grocery stores, up and down State and on the side streets here and there on both sides. Say from the corner of Pennsylvania Avenue out to about where Bill Gatton's place is located now. In that area, and give or take no more than one block on each side, there were 24 grocery stores in operation. The others were scattered about. There were several grocery stores out in the residential neighborhoods, but as far as business was concerned, say from Pennsylvania Avenue to about 10th Street, that was what we'd call downtown, and there's where your business was. There were no box stores nowhere around here at the time. There were not even what we might call a shopping center out here in yonder. True that there was a place where there's more than one store, but not enough to be called a real shopping center. If my memory serves me right, there was not one vacancy where you could have rented a building between Pennsylvania Avenue and 10th Street. I do not know of one place that could have been rented at that time. And the picture was just about the same on each side, give and take a block on either side of State Street, down the side streets. They were full. So I think that I would have to say that the biggest change I have seen in downtown Bristol is the fact that our business moved out. It's moving back some. I mean, different things are opening up now. And I was glad to see that. There was a time when I thought we were going to be a ghost town downtown here, but it looks like now that things are pretty much under control and going to be different. But if you can imagine virtually all the shopping taking place in Bristol down through this area right where we are today, that was right in the middle of it, and all around. Many has been the time when I've stepped off the sidewalk in order to get down the sidewalk. Have to get off of the main walk and walk around the people. It'd be crowded up so in the talking, just meeting, visiting, talking on the streets. And Saturdays were especially like that. Saturday was the day when a lot of people came into town. And some of the stores then, to accommodate them, were staying open till 9 o'clock or so on Saturday night. It was working like a beehive down here on Saturday. I talked to a gentleman this morning that said he and his brother, they were just little boys then, well, 10, 12 years old, 12, 15 maybe. They would walk into town every Saturday and go to a movie and then go up to Bunnings drugstore and get them a hot dog and a cold drink, all for less than a quarter. Well, even in 1953, when I came here, you could get 2 hot dogs and a cold drink for a quarter at Bunnings, and I suppose some of these lunch counters too, probably about the same way. They'd have to meet competition, of course, and I suppose some of them were the same way. In that we're here today in one of the old dime stores, people call them that. Farther back, they call them nickel and dime stores. I've read people's letters and so on, where they say, one lady wrote it, writing from out in the Holston Valley, said, I'm going to try to find me a job in a nickel and dime store, she said. This was about 1930 or so. But there were first of all, up this way was McCrory's, and then we have Woolworth, and then where we are today, and then Cress, and then across the street, up the street a little ways, was Rose. I've shopped in all of them. You could buy anything just about you want in the way of little notions and so on in those stores. Another thing that has changed, when I came here, there were movie theaters, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right within easy walking distance of where I live. There were 2 across the street in the next block up, side by side. And then we had the big Paramount, which has recently been restored and made a beautiful job at it. And then there was the Columbia around on 5th Street, right next door to where I went to night school around there. Came here to go to school and stay 9 months, and here it is 60 years later and we're still here. Kind of like the man in the old movie that came to dinner and never did go home. Well, that's about what happened here. At that time, you could go to a good movie for, well, sometimes for a dime, but most of the time for a quarter. They'd have specials on where you could take caps off of Coca-Cola bottles and so on. So many caps and get in free. And bread wrappers. You take so many bread wrappers and get in. One time, I don't remember what the special occasion was, but the Cameo down here, if you had an Indian head penny, they'd give you admission to the theater. Well, a lot of people scraped and asked Grandma and Grandpa and everybody else trying to find the Indian head penny where they could go to the movie down at the Cameo. Well, now, all we've got downtown, as far as I know, in the way of movies, and it's mostly live on stage, is the Paramount. The Cameo operated some, but hasn't now in many years. Way out on West State Street, there was another theater. I believe it's called the Lee, maybe. I think maybe there's a business in that building out there now where that was. But when it all boils down, you want to know what big change has taken place in Bristol since those days, early days. Not early for some people, but early for me. I'd have to say it's that the shopping has switched. We now have the big box stores, and there's where most of the people go. Most of the stores downtown now are specialty stores, and that's getting good. I think it's coming out of it. And I hope to live to see it even back something like it was. Another thing that was going on 60 years ago that has come back in vogue now, there were a lot of apartments upstairs downtown. I could name several buildings where you could live upstairs. And that, of course, has made a resurgence and coming back again. There was at least 1 or 2 places downtown where they just had rooms upstairs, and I think there's maybe 1 or 2 remaining yet. 1, I'm pretty sure. But at that time, there were a lot of people living right here in downtown Bristol, so they had it good. Anything they wanted, they could walk right to the store and get it. And of course, our big need now is to have a grocery store, and I believe there has been one opened up on 6th Street. I haven't been in there in a good while, but I believe there is one around there. But that for a long time has been the big need in downtown Bristol. I wonder sometimes, I can't help but wonder what another 60 years will do to us. Of course, I don't think I'll be around if I do, I'll be celebrated as the oldest person in the world, but then I don't think I'll be around here then. But I would like to know just what's going to happen in the next 60 years. If there's as much change in 60 years as there has been in the last 60 years, it's going to be a different world. Well, I wish I had more time to tell you about things that were going on downtown at that time, but the time runs out pretty quick, and so we'll have to leave that for another time. But it was an interesting town, a lively town, very, very good place to live, as it still is, but it was a prospering town. The war is over, people had gotten back on their feet, and things were going good here 60 years ago. I chose it for my home. I came here not knowing one person, nor did one person know me, a total stranger. But the people were so nice, the country's good, everything I liked, I just liked it. So I chose it, adopted it as my home. Until we meet again, may the best in life be yours.